I discovered my fiancé and my own mother were sleeping together under the same roof where I dreamed of my wedding. And worse, she got pregnant by him just to destroy me. Good morning, my dear viewers. I'm Helen Rogers. I'm 79 years old today, and you can't imagine how difficult it is for me to tell this story even after so many decades. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It gives me strength to continue sharing my life experiences with you. It was 1964. I had just turned 18. America and the world were experiencing times of change, but in the small town of Riverdale Springs, where I was born and raised, time seemed to stand still. We were only 5,000 inhabitants. Everyone knew everyone, and Sundays in the square after church were sacred. My father had passed away a year earlier in a terrible farming accident, leaving only me and my mother, Cecilia. My mother had always been a beautiful woman. In her youth, they said she was the most coveted girl in the region. My father won her over after much persistence, from what I was told. I grew up hearing this love story, admiring this strong woman who raised a family with such care. But when my father died, something changed inside her. It was as if a shadow had taken over her heart. At 35, widowed, my mother began to look at me differently. Not as a mother looks at a daughter, but with rivalry. With each compliment I received, she became more bitter. When someone commented on my youth or beauty, she'd respond with cutting remarks. "Enjoy it while you can. Beauty fades quickly." Or "What good is being pretty if you can't keep a man?" At the time, I tried to understand. "It's grief," I told myself. "She'll get better when the pain passes." But it didn't pass. It only got worse when Anthony appeared in our lives. Anthony Smith was 25 and had secured a job at the only textile factory in our area. He was different from the other men there. He had studied in the city, talked about places I only knew from photos in old magazines, and drove a blue Volkswagen Beetle that drew attention wherever it went. For an 18-year-old girl raised in that backwater, he seemed like he'd stepped out of a movie. We met at the church social in June 1964. He asked me to dance, recited poetry to me, made me feel special. I remember coming home that night, unable to sleep, replaying every word, every glance. My mother noticed my enthusiasm and initially even seemed happy for me. "Finally, someone paying attention to you," she said with a smile that now, looking back, already showed signs of what was to come. Anthony began visiting frequently. He always brought flowers, always polite, winning over not just me, but also my mother. He complimented her cooking, listened to her stories, made her laugh in a way I hadn't seen since my father was alive. Back then, that made me happy. I thought it was a sign that he would be accepted into the family, that we would form a harmonious home. How naive I was, my God. 3 months after we met, Anthony proposed to me. It was on the park bench, under the moonlight, with a simple ring that to me was worth more than any fortune. I accepted without hesitation. I dreamed of leaving that small town, seeing the world, building a family. My mother received the news with enthusiasm that I now understand was false. "We're going to have the best engagement this town has ever seen," she said. And she really threw herself into the preparations. She took care of every detail, sewed the dress I would wear with me, made guest lists. I was so wrapped up in the dream that I didn't notice when things began to change. It happened gradually. Anthony started showing up at home at odd hours when I was working at Mr. Johnson's store. He said he came to help my mother with the engagement preparations. He began canceling our Sunday meetings with increasingly vague excuses. "I need to take care of some things at the factory. I'm too tired today. I have to visit a sick friend." My mother changed too. She started dressing up more, using perfumes that had been stored away since my father died, painting her lips even to stay at home. When questioned, she'd say, "Just because I'm a widow doesn't mean I have to look like one. I'm only 35, Helen." The first suspicions came when I found one of Anthony's shirts in my mother's room. She said she had taken it to wash, that he had left it there after helping her move some furniture. I accepted the explanation. Then came the whispers, the conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the glances exchanged during dinner. I ignored each sign, buried each piece of evidence deep in my heart. Part of me knew, but the other part, the dreamy girl, the daughter who trusted her mother, the fiancé in love, refused to see it. I continued with the engagement preparations, saving every penny of my salary to buy fabric for the dress, dreaming of the day we would finally formalize our commitment before the entire town. What I didn't know was that while I was dreaming about the future, they were planning to destroy me. While I sewed my dress at night, my mother sneaked out to meet my fiancé. While I counted the days until the engagement, they counted the days until they could get their hands on the small inheritance my father had left me. A lifetime savings from hard work on the farm. Can you imagine? The woman who gave me life conspiring with the man who promised me love to rob me not only financially, but also emotionally? They didn't just want my money. They wanted to destroy my faith in people, my ability to trust and love. One night, about a month before the date set for the engagement, I followed my mother when she slipped out through the back door. I saw her get into Anthony's Blue Beetle, parked a few blocks away. I saw them kiss. Not a greeting kiss, but a lover's kiss. The world stopped at that moment. I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. I stumbled back home, crying silently so the neighbors wouldn't hear, so no one would know of my humiliation. That night, lying in bed with eyes swollen from crying, I made a decision that I would soon change. I wouldn't confront either of them. I would pretend I knew nothing, continue with the engagement preparations, and at the last minute flee to the city where my cousin Lucy lived. I would let them bear the shame of having to explain to the whole town the reason for my flight. It was a plan born of pain, but one that seemed dignified in that moment of desperation. I continued pretending, observing every detail with new eyes. The notes exchanged during Sunday lunches, the hand touches when they thought I wasn't looking, the way my mother seemed to flourish while I withered. Each day that passed, the pain transformed into something harder, colder. I was learning that sometimes the people who should protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. The engagement invitation was printed, the date set, the church hall reserved. I sewed my light blue dress at night, with silent tears streaming down my face. It was no longer a celebration dress, but a costume for my final act in that town, which now seemed too small to contain so much betrayal. What I didn't know was that fate had other plans for me. Plans that would be revealed in the most cruel way possible during what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. A revelation that would change everything and force me to make an even more drastic decision than simply fleeing in the dead of night. But before I continue this story that still pains my heart, I want to thank you for being here with me. This channel has been a blessing in my old age, allowing me to share my experiences and perhaps help others going through difficult times. Life is long, my dears, and wounds heal, even those that seem impossible to cure. If you're enjoying my story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. The day of my engagement was approaching. Only 3 days left. And the nervousness I felt wasn't that of an anxious bride, but of a young woman about to flee from everything she knew. My small suitcase was already partially packed, hidden under the bed. I saved every coin I could, preparing myself for a new and uncertain life in the city. The morning of that fateful Saturday in October 1964 dawned with a cloudless blue sky, as if nature were mocking the storm raging in my chest. The engagement would be at 7 p.m. in the church hall. I had planned to leave the house around 5 p.m., saying I was going to get ready at my friend Teresa's house. Instead, I would catch the 5:30 p.m. bus to the city. But God, in His infinite wisdom, or perhaps cruelty, had other plans for me. I was finishing the final adjustments on my light blue dress when I realized I was out of thread. I needed to run to Mrs. Josephine's notions shop before it closed at noon for lunch. It was during this hurried trip that everything changed. As I passed by Mr. I. Johnson's store, I saw Anthony's Blue Beetle parked there. I found it strange, as he should have been at the factory at that hour. I entered the store with the excuse of buying a soda. At the back of the store, I saw Anthony talking with Mr. Johnson, who was my mother's uncle. I hid behind the canned goods shelf to listen. "So, everything is settled for after the wedding?" Mr. Johnson was asking in a low voice. "The bank will release the money that Helen's father left once you present the marriage certificate?" "Yes," Anthony replied with a coldness that froze my blood. "It's almost 2 years' salary at the factory. With that and what Cecilia has managed to save, we can start a good life in the city." "And Helen?" insisted Mr. Johnson, seeming genuinely concerned. Anthony shrugged. "What about her? After I get the money, we'll figure something out. Cecilia is already preparing the ground, telling everyone her daughter hasn't been right in the head since her father died. No one will be surprised when I file for divorce, claiming mental problems." I left the store without being noticed, with shaky legs and a heart beating so hard I thought I might faint right there in the street. It wasn't just a passionate betrayal. It was a meticulous plan to rob me and then abandon me, staining my reputation so no one would believe me. I returned home dazed, completely forgetting about the thread I needed to buy. My mother wasn't there. She had gone to take care of engagement details, according to the note left on the table. I entered her room, something I rarely did since the changes in her behavior began. I started searching, though I didn't know exactly what for. I rummaged through drawers, looked under the mattress, inside the wardrobe. That's when I found at the bottom of a handkerchief drawer a small diary with a brown leather cover. I had never seen that notebook before. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. The first pages were about grieving for my father, words from a widow genuinely devastated by loss. But soon the tone changed. There were entries about how she felt invisible, about how the men in town only had eyes for young girls, about how she resented me for stealing the attention that should be hers. And then began the entries about Anthony. The first dated just 2 weeks after he had asked me to be his girlfriend. "He looked at me differently today," she wrote. "Not as if I were the girlfriend's mother, but as a woman. I felt something I hadn't felt since before August died." The following pages detailed how their relationship had begun. A touch of hands that lasted longer than necessary, a compliment whispered when I wasn't around, a stolen kiss in the kitchen while I was in the backyard hanging clothes. Cecilia described everything with a richness of detail that made my stomach turn. "Anthony says he'll marry Helen for the money that August left," said an entry from 2 months ago. "Then we'll run away together to the city. He'll file for divorce and no one can judge us. I'll finally have my second chance in life." The last entry, dated the day before, was the most devastating. "I'm 2 months pregnant. Anthony was initially concerned, but then saw that this could accelerate our plans. I'm going to announce it to Helen tomorrow. Seeing her face when she finds out I'm expecting a child by the man she loves will be my little revenge for all these years when she had everything I didn't have: youth, beauty, the attention of my own husband." I closed the diary, feeling as if I'd been punched in the stomach. The woman who bore me, who should protect me above all, was plotting my destruction with an almost sadistic pleasure, and the man I loved, with whom I dreamed of building a life, had never really loved me. I put the diary exactly where I had found it and left the room. I sat in the rocking chair on the porch, the same one where my father used to sit to smoke his pipe on Sunday afternoons. And I stayed there looking at the horizon, not really seeing anything, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. When I heard the gate creaking, it was almost dinner time. My mother entered carrying shopping bags, her face flushed, and a smile on her lips that now seemed sinister to me. How could I not have noticed before the falseness of that smile? "Helen, good thing you're here. I need to tell you something," she said, placing the bags on the kitchen table. Her voice had a note of barely contained excitement. I looked at her with a lump in my throat. "What is it, Mom?" "I went to the doctor today. I haven't been feeling well these past few days, you know, with these morning sicknesses." She made a dramatic pause, watching my reaction. "Dr. Mendez confirmed what I already suspected. I'm pregnant, Helen, 2 months along." There it was, finally said out loud. The final confirmation of the betrayal I already knew about, but hearing it from her mouth, seeing the satisfaction in her eyes as she waited for the news to destroy me, was like someone twisting a knife in my chest. "Whose child is it, Mom?" My voice came out firmer than I expected, surprising us both. Her smile faltered for an instant, but she quickly recovered. "Well, Helen, what kind of question is that? I'm a widow, not dead. I met someone. We've been seeing each other for some time. I was going to tell you after your engagement so as not to steal your moment. It's Anthony's, isn't it?" The words left my mouth before I could contain them. Her face hardened, the mask of the loving mother falling completely. "And if it is, what are you going to do about it?" That response was like a slap. There was no denial, no shame, just challenge, and a hint of perverse satisfaction. "Why?" was all I could ask, the tears finally escaping my eyes. "Why would you do this to me? I'm your daughter." "So what? What has that given me besides wrinkles and gray hair?" Her voice distilled bitterness. "You've always had everything, Helen. Youth, beauty, your father's attention. He adored you, you know? Sometimes I thought he loved you more than me." "That's not true," I whispered, shocked by the venom in her words. "Yes, it is. And after he died, what was left for me? To see you flourish while I wither, to see men looking at you in church while barely noticing my presence." And then Anthony appeared, and he saw me, Helen, not as the girlfriend's mother, but as a woman. "He's with you for the money Dad left," I said, raising my chin. "I heard you two talking. I know your plan." For a moment I saw surprise in her eyes, but she quickly recovered. "So what? At least I'll have something. You're young. You'll find another guy, have other loves. This is my last chance." I was about to respond when the door opened again. It was Anthony coming in without knocking, as he had become accustomed to doing. He stopped at the threshold, sensing the tension in the air. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking from me to my mother. "Helen knows everything," my mother answered with frightening calm. "About us, about the baby, about the plan." His face turned pale. For a moment I thought he would deny everything, say my mother was crazy, that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But then his shoulders dropped in resignation. "I was going to tell you after the wedding," he said, as if that mitigated the betrayal. "I didn't want to hurt you." Those words, so empty of meaning in the face of the monstrosity of what they had done, were the last straw. Something inside me, something that perhaps had been dormant throughout my entire life, awakened at that moment. It wasn't just pain or anger. It was a fierce determination not to let them win, not to let them define who I was or what I deserved. "The engagement is canceled," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "And you two can keep this house, this baby, this miserable life you're building on lies. I don't want any of it anymore." "Don't be dramatic," said my mother, rolling her eyes. "Where will you go? You have no money, no one." "That's not your problem," I replied, heading to my room. "As of today, you're no longer my mother. And you, Anthony, were never the man I thought you were." It was that night that I made the decision that would forever change the course of my life. But how I confronted this betrayal, what happened on the night of the engagement that never took place, and how I found the strength to rebuild my life from scratch. After discovering my mother and Anthony's betrayal, I spent the night awake. I didn't shed another tear. It was as if my eyes had dried up along with my illusions. The sun rose to find me sitting on the edge of the bed, still dressed in the clothes from the day before, staring at the peeling wall of my room as if it could give me answers. The day of the engagement arrived, October 16th, 1964, a date I will never forget. The whole town was buzzing with preparations. After all, it wasn't every day that there was a party of that size in Riverdale Springs. Gossip about my mother's condition hadn't spread yet, but it wouldn't take long. In small towns, secrets have short legs. I spent the day pretending everything was normal. I helped set the breakfast table, swept the yard, watered the plants. My mother observed me with a mixture of confusion and triumph, clearly disconcerted by my apparent calm. Anthony didn't show up, probably afraid to face me in the light of day, the coward. Around 3 p.m., I announced I was going to Teresa's house, my childhood friend, to get ready for the party. My mother nodded, saying we would meet at the church hall at 7 p.m. There was something in her eyes. Maybe a pang of remorse. No, I was just seeing what I wanted to see. That woman no longer had any humanity toward me. I left home with a small bag containing my light blue dress and some makeup items. No one needed to know that hidden under Teresa's bed was my already packed suitcase with everything I could carry for my new life. Some clothes, the silver brooch my father gave me on my 15th birthday, and savings I had accumulated working at Mr. Johnson's store. The plan was simple. I would get ready at Teresa's house, appear at the beginning of the party so everyone would see me, and then go to the bathroom, from where I would escape through the back of the church hall to catch the 8:30 p.m. bus to the city. When they noticed my absence, I would already be too far away to be caught. But destiny, my dears, always has a peculiar sense of humor. I arrived at Teresa's house and told her everything. She was the only person I trusted at that moment. Her eyes widened with each sordid detail of the story. When I finished, she hugged me tightly and cried for me the tears I could no longer shed. "You can't just run away like this, Helen," she said, holding my hands. "Everyone will think you had a breakdown, exactly as your mother and Anthony are planning to say. You need to defend yourself." "And what do you suggest?" I asked, too exhausted to think of alternatives. "That I tell the whole town my mother got pregnant by my fiancé? Who will believe me? They'll say I'm crazy with jealousy." Teresa squeezed my fingers tightly. "They'll believe if you tell them in front of everyone at the engagement, with them present." My heart raced just thinking about this possibility. It was too bold. It was unthinkable. It was exactly what they deserved. "Are you suggesting I go there and make a scene?" "Not a scene, Helen. The plain and simple truth before they have a chance to distort it." At that moment, something changed inside me. The shy and obedient girl I had always been began to give way to a woman who wouldn't let herself be silently destroyed, a woman who would fight for her dignity, even if it meant breaking all the rules of decorum I had been taught. We spent the following hours planning. Teresa helped me get ready. I put on my light blue dress, pinned my hair in an elegant bun, applied a red lipstick I had bought especially for the occasion. Looking in the mirror, I saw a stranger, someone with my face, but with a determination in her eyes I had never seen before. At 7 p.m. sharp, we arrived at the church hall. The decoration was simple but beautiful. Wildflowers in glass jars, white ribbons on chairs, a table with a modest cake, and bottles of cheap wine. Almost all 200 guests were already there, eager to see the young bride and her promised one exchanging rings. My mother was near the improvised altar, talking with the pastor and some ladies from the church. She wore a dark green dress that accentuated her still slender figure, and her eyes shone with a joy that I now knew was perverse. Anthony was beside her, elegant in his only suit, clearly nervous, his eyes constantly seeking the door, probably to see if I would actually show up. I entered the hall with Teresa by my side. A murmur ran through the crowd. "The bride has arrived. How beautiful she is. How lucky Anthony is." If only they knew. My mother saw me and waved, her smile not reaching her eyes. Anthony turned slightly pale, probably fearing I would make a scene. Little did he know that was exactly what I planned to do. I walked slowly down the central aisle, greeting people, accepting hugs and congratulations with a fixed smile on my face. When I reached near the altar, Pastor John signaled for everyone to be quiet. It was time for the engagement ceremony. "Dear brothers and sisters," he began, "we are gathered here to celebrate the commitment of love between Helen Rogers and Anthony Smith, who will soon seal their union before God in holy matrimony." I looked at Anthony's face, at those brown eyes that I believed loved me, and saw nothing but guilt and fear. I looked at my mother, At that woman I once loved more than anything in the world and saw only cruel satisfaction. Before we proceed, continued the pastor, does anyone have anything to say? The silence that followed was like the interval between lightning and thunder, that moment of suspension where the whole world seems to hold its breath. I have something to say, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the hall. All eyes turned to me. I felt my legs trembling, but I kept my posture erect, chin raised. I want to thank all of you for your presence today, I began, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. You came here expecting to celebrate true love, a sacred commitment. Unfortunately, I have to inform you that this engagement is canceled. A murmur ran through the hall. I saw the pastor's face contract in confusion, Anthony's eyes widen in panic, and my mother take a step forward as if to stop me. I discovered yesterday that my fiancé and my mother have been having an affair for months, I continued, the words coming out like a dammed river that finally breaks its barriers. Not only that, but she is 2 months pregnant by him. The shock was immediate and visceral. There were exclamations of astonishment, agitated whispers. Some people even crossed themselves as if they were in the presence of the devil himself. My mother advanced toward me, her face contorted with fury. "Have you gone mad? How dare you invent such a thing?" she shouted, but her voice trembled, betraying her guilt. "I'm not inventing anything, Mother. I read your diary. I heard you announce your pregnancy last night and heard Anthony confess everything." Anthony, pale as wax, tried to approach. "Helen, you're confused. We can explain." "Explain what?" I cut him off, my voice rising an octave. "How you planned to steal the money my father left me? How you were going to abandon me after the wedding, claiming I was crazy? Or perhaps you want to explain how you started this disgusting affair behind my back, in the same house where I slept dreaming of our future?" With each word, I saw their faces contorting in guilt and shame. It was no longer just my word against theirs. Their own expressions condemned them before the entire town. "And don't worry," I added, looking at the shocked crowd. "I won't go into details about what's happening inside my mother's belly. I'll spare you the disgusting details of these horrible people I trusted." The entire hall fell into a sepulchral silence. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Teresa, silently supporting me. I took a deep breath. I looked one last time at those two faces I once loved so much and who betrayed me so deeply, and concluded, "This engagement is canceled. This relationship is over, and from today on, I no longer have a mother." I left the hall with my head held high, leaving behind the growing murmur of scandalized voices. Teresa accompanied me to the door, where she hugged me tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered. "Where are you going now?" "Far away from here," I replied, feeling a strange lightness despite everything. "I have a cousin in the city. I'm going there tonight." "Are you sure you don't want to stay at my house until things calm down?" I shook my head. "I can't stay, Teresa. This town now only has memories I want to forget." We said goodbye with tears in our eyes and promises to stay in touch. I picked up my suitcase hidden in the back of her house and walked to the bus station, feeling the curious gazes of people who were already beginning to spread the news of the scandal. But before catching the bus, I had one last stop to make. I returned to the house that had been my home for 18 years, where I grew up, where I loved, where I was happy, until everything collapsed. I entered silently, knowing it would be empty with everyone still at the church hall. The anger I had contained for so long finally overflowed. I took the photos of Anthony and tore them into 1,000 pieces. I broke the plates I had bought for my trousseau. I threw the vase he had given me as a gift against the wall. I screamed and cried as I destroyed everything that reminded me of that false relationship. In my mother's room, the fury reached its peak. I tore her expensive dresses, broke her imported perfumes, and found hidden in a box the love letters exchanged between her and Anthony. I took them to the living room and set fire to them in the small fireplace, watching the lying words turn to ashes. When I finished, the house looked like a battlefield, like my heart. I sat on the floor of the devastated living room, exhausted and with trembling hands, crying until I had no more tears. The sun was beginning to set. When I finally got up, I took a piece of paper and wrote a short note. "You won. The house is yours. I'm never coming back." I left it on the kitchen table, the only piece of furniture I had spared from my fury. With my small suitcase in hand and my heart in pieces, I left that house for the last time. At the bus station, I bought a ticket for the 8:30 bus, the last one that would leave that night for the city. Sitting on the wooden bench, waiting for the departure time, I felt a mix of terror and liberation. I was 18 years old, completely alone, without family, without a fiancé, without plans. Everything I owned fit in that worn suitcase and in the few crumpled bills I kept in my coat pocket. But I had something no one could take from me: my dignity. I hadn't fled stealthily. I hadn't kept quiet in the face of injustice. I had confronted my betrayers head on. I had told my truth. When the bus finally departed, taking me away from Riverdale Springs, from its dirt roads, from the church tower that had marked all the important moments of my life, I cried silently, my forehead resting against the cold glass of the window. They weren't tears of sadness, but of farewell, of a life left behind, of a naive girl who no longer existed. We reached the city around midnight. The big city welcomed me with its bright lights, its wide streets, its incessant noise. I took a taxi, spending a precious part of my savings, and gave the address of my cousin Lucy. I prayed that she would be home, that she would take me in, that she wouldn't send me back to the hell I had left. The taxi stopped in front of a small 2-story house in a modest neighborhood. I paid the fare, picked up my suitcase, and with my heart in my throat knocked on the door. It took a few minutes until a light turned on inside, and I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there was Lucy, my cousin 5 years older than me, who had left Riverdale Springs right after finishing high school. Her sleepy face transformed into surprise when she saw me. "Helen, what are you doing here at this hour? Wasn't your engagement today?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. Instead, I broke down in tears, all the repressed emotions of those days finally finding an escape valve. Lucy didn't ask any more questions. She simply hugged me, pulled me inside, and closed the door behind us. That night marked the end of the Helen I had been, and the beginning of the Helen I would become. But how did I rebuild my life from scratch? How did I find in art a form of expression and healing? How did I learn to trust again after such betrayal? That first night at my cousin Lucy's house, I slept a restless sleep, filled with nightmares. I woke up disoriented, for a moment not remembering where I was or why my heart ached so much. Then the memories came flooding back. The betrayal, the confrontation, the escape, the reality that at 18 years old I had lost everything I knew. Lucy was my guardian angel in those first days. She didn't ask questions until I was ready to talk. When I finally told her the whole story, I saw her eyes fill with tears and indignation. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said, squeezing my hands in hers. "We'll rebuild your life day by day." And so began my journey in the city. Lucy lived alone in a small 2-story house with 2 bedrooms in a working-class neighborhood. She worked at an art supplies store called Colors on Canvas, owned by an Italian gentleman, Alberto Monticelli, who had emigrated to America after World War II. The first week, I hardly left the room. Shame and pain consumed me from within. I thought about the public humiliation, the gossip that certainly ran rampant in Riverdale Springs, what people might be saying about me. More than once, Lucy caught me crying silently, curled up in bed, hugging the only object I brought from my previous life, a photograph of my father. "You can't continue like this," she said one November morning, opening the curtains of the room and letting the sun in for the first time in days. "Get up, take a shower, get dressed. I'm taking you to see the store. Mr. Alberto needs someone to help with cleaning." My first instinct was to refuse. How could I face new people? Inevitable questions, curious looks. But something in Lucy's firm tone didn't allow for discussion. With effort, I dragged myself out of bed, took a long shower, the first in days, and put on one of the simple dresses I had brought with me. Colors on Canvas was a 15-minute walk from Lucy's house, on a narrow street filled with small businesses. It was larger than I expected, an old mansion that had been adapted with large windows that let in natural light. Upon entering, I was immediately enveloped by the smell of oil paint, turpentine, and wood. Mr. Alberto was organizing paintbrushes behind the counter. He was a man in his 60s, short and stocky, with a thick white mustache and eyebrows so thick they almost met in the center. His blue eyes, however, were surprisingly gentle. "So, this is your cousin?" he asked Lucy in English, heavy with an Italian accent. He turned to me with a kind smile. "Welcome, girl. Lucy told me you need work." She didn't ask where I came from, why I had left my town, or what I knew how to do. He just showed me a faded apron and explained my tasks. Sweep the floor, clean the shelves, organize the materials, answer the phone when necessary. "The salary is small," he warned, "but it's honest. And you can stay after hours to watch the classes if you want." I didn't know at the time, but that invitation would change the course of my life. I started working the next day. The first weeks were a blur of mechanical tasks executed on autopilot. I would wake up, walk to the store, sweep, clean, organize, answer occasional phone calls, and return home exhausted, but grateful for the exhaustion, as it meant a few hours without thinking about what I had left behind. The store offered painting classes 3 times a week in the evenings. At first, I just observed from a distance while finishing cleaning. Professor Henry Asunción was a middle-aged man with a mysterious past and unquestionable talent. His students were mainly middle-class ladies and some young art students. On a rainy December night, when the store was almost empty due to the storm, I stayed late organizing paints. Henry was preparing canvases for the next day's class and caught me watching him. "You're always watching," he said without raising his eyes from his work. "Why don't you try it?" I felt my face burn with shame. "I just clean here, Professor. I don't know anything about art." He finally looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "No one is born knowing. Everyone starts from scratch." Those simple words reverberated within me in a way I didn't expect. Everyone starts from scratch. Wasn't that exactly what I was doing in all aspects of my life? Henry handed me a brush. "Come, I'll show you how to hold this correctly." That first improvised lesson lasted only 20 minutes, but it marked the beginning of a passion I never knew existed within me. Henry taught me how to hold the brush, how to mix the most basic colors, how to make a simple stroke on the canvas. My hands trembled so much that I could barely make a straight line, but when I finished, something had changed within me. In the weeks that followed, whenever the store was empty or after hours, Henry would give me small lessons. Mr. Alberto, noticing my interest, began allowing me to use leftover paint and canvas scraps to practice. "The girl has an eye for colors," I heard him comment to Lucy once. "It's rare to see that in someone without training." My first complete painting was a technical disaster, an attempt at a landscape with all the wrong proportions and non-existent perspective. But the colors were vivid, intense, almost screaming in their need for expression. "You paint with anger," Henry observed, looking critically at my canvas. "With pain. That's good. Technique can be learned, but feeling, true feeling, can't be taught." I began to paint whenever I could. At first, they were just basic exercises, apples, jars, simple objects to practice light and shadow. Gradually, I moved on to imagined landscapes, urban scenes seen from the store window. The more I painted, the less I thought about the betrayal, the humiliation, the pain I had left in Riverdale Springs. The year 1965 arrived, bringing new air. In March, we received a letter from Aunt Gertrude, my father's sister, who still lived in Riverdale Springs. She told us that my mother and Anthony had married in a discreet ceremony at the pastor's house. No one from town attended, except the mandatory witnesses. The scandal had been so great that they lived practically isolated. Cecilia's belly was already beginning to show, confirming to everyone the truthfulness of my denouncement. Strangely, the news didn't affect me as I expected. I felt only a detachment, as if I were reading about characters from a book I had long set aside. That night, I painted a picture entirely in blue tones, not a scene of sadness, but of calm, of deep waters and infinite sky. "You're healing," Henry said when he saw the canvas. "The pain is still there, but it no longer defines you." In June, 6 months after my arrival in the city, Mr. Alberto surprised me with a proposal. In addition to cleaning, I could help attend to customers, explaining about the materials I already knew so well. It meant a small but welcome increase in my salary. "And on Sundays," he added, with that gentle smile above his thick mustache, "you can use the space in the back to paint. I've been watching your progress, girl. You have something to say with your brushes." That small, improvised atelier in the back of the store became my sanctuary. Each Sunday, I immersed myself in colors, shapes, feelings I couldn't express with words. I painted women, always women, in different emotional states, trapped in cages, emerging from turbulent waters, looking towards distant horizons. In September, during an evening class, a customer entered the store. She was an elegant lady with impeccably arranged gray hair and clothes that betrayed her social position. Mrs. Elisa Mendonça, as we soon discovered, was a known art collector in the city. While Mr. Alberto attended to her, she walked around the store, examining the displayed materials. That's when she stopped in front of a canvas I had recently painted. A woman with her back turned looking at a burning house in the distance, her red dress merging with the fire. Mr. Alberto had placed it in a corner of the store, more as decoration than for sale. "Whose work is this?" asked Mrs. Elisa, adjusting her glasses to examine it better. Mr. Alberto hesitated for a moment before answering, "A young local artist, a self-taught one." "I want to meet her," said Mrs. Elisa, with the assurance of someone accustomed to having her wishes granted. "There's something powerful in this work. Raw, yes, technically immature but powerful." When Mr. Alberto introduced me, I saw the surprise in Mrs. Elisa's eyes, realizing that the young artist was just the store attendant, a 19-year-old girl without art training or pedigree. "You have a story to tell, don't you?" she asked, observing me with keen eyes. "That's what makes your art interesting. Keep painting and allow me to take this canvas. I'll pay a fair price for it." That was the first sale of my life. With the money, I bought more paints and better quality canvases. More importantly, I gained something I had lost in Riverdale Springs: confidence. In the months that followed, Mrs. Elisa returned several times, bought 2 more canvases, and introduced me to other collectors. Mr. Alberto, perceiving the opportunity, designated a permanent space in the store's showcase for my works. 1966 brought more changes. Lucy met Peter, an accountant who frequented the stationery store next to Colors on Canvas, and they soon began dating. I knew that eventually they would want privacy, that I couldn't continue living with my cousin forever. With the savings from selling the paintings, I rented a modest room a few blocks from the store. It was my first truly my own space. I transformed it into a mini atelier with a mattress on the floor, a small wardrobe for my few clothes, and the rest dedicated to art. An improvised table for paints, a second-hand easel, canvases leaning against the walls. I painted more and more, developing my own style that mixed realism with symbolic elements. My women no longer seemed so tormented. Now they fought, resisted, transformed themselves. The critics who eventually discovered my work spoke of resilient femininity and visual metaphors of rebirth, without knowing that each canvas was a chapter of my own reconstruction story. In August 1967, almost 3 years after my arrival in the city, I received an invitation that would change my trajectory. The Municipal Cultural Center would organize an exhibition of young artists, and my name had been indicated by Mrs. Elisa. I would have the right to present 5 works under the title Rebirths. I spent weeks selecting, adjusting, revisiting canvases until choosing the ones that best represented my journey. The first showed a young woman with her back to a small town, looking at a road that was lost on the horizon. The second portrayed the same figure huddled in a dark corner, shrouded in shadows. In the third, she stood before an easel, holding a brush as if it were a weapon. The fourth showed her emerging from turbulent waters, her face determined despite the waves. The fifth and last, my favorite, presented her standing on top of a hill, arms open to a sky where the sun broke through heavy clouds. The exhibition was a modest success, but significant for an unknown artist like me. I sold 3 of the 5 canvases exhibited and received an honorable mention from the jury. More importantly, the local newspaper published a small article about the exhibition with emphasis on my work, described as a powerful visual narrative of female overcoming. It was at this exhibition that I met John Meyer, a young university professor of literature who was intrigued by the narrative sequence of my canvases. He approached during the inauguration, asked insightful questions about my creative process, about the stories behind the images. "I feel there's an entire book inside each of these canvases," he commented, looking at the woman emerging from the waters, as if each brushstroke were an unwritten paragraph. For the first time since I left Riverdale Springs, I felt something awaken within me, beyond the determination to survive. An interest, a curiosity, an attraction to someone who saw beyond the surface of my paintings. But how did this unexpected encounter transform into a relationship based on mutual respect and renewed trust? How did I learn to open my heart again after such a deep betrayal? How did I find the courage to form a family? After meeting John at that exhibition in 1967, my life began to change in ways I never would have imagined. Our first date was at a cafe near the university where he taught. We talked for hours about art, literature, philosophy, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel diminished or judged. John had a way of listening that made every word seem important, every thought worthy of consideration. Our relationship blossomed slowly, with the caution of 2 people who carry scars. John had lost his wife to a prolonged illness 2 years earlier and was still learning to live with that void. I, with my heart torn by betrayal, feared giving my trust again. "I'm not asking you to trust me immediately," he told me one night as we walked through the city park. "Trust is built day by day, like a canvas you paint stroke by stroke." It was exactly what I needed to hear, the understanding that emotional scars don't disappear overnight, that time is necessary for deep wounds to heal completely. During the months that followed, I continued to paint and work at Mr. Alberto's store, which now regularly sold my works. John would pick me up after work on Fridays, and we would spend the weekends exploring museums, watching plays, or simply talking in his small apartment filled with books. In 1968, a year after our first encounter, John asked me to marry him. It wasn't a grandiose or dramatic proposal. We were in his apartment on a rainy night. I had prepared a simple dinner, and while we were washing the dishes together, he simply asked if I would like to build a life by his side. "You don't have to answer now," he added, drying a plate with unnecessary attention. "I know that for you, more than for most people, this isn't a simple step." That night, lying in my bed in the small atelier room, I reflected on the path I had traveled since leaving Riverdale Springs 4 years earlier. From the devastated girl who arrived in the city with just a suitcase, I had transformed into an independent woman, an artist with her own voice. Would it be fair to bring the ghosts of a past betrayal into a new marriage? My answer came in the form of a painting, a small, intimate picture of 2 intertwined hands against a background of night sky. I gave it to John the next day with a simple "yes" written on the back. We married in April 1969 in a modest ceremony in the garden of Mrs. Elisa's house, who had become a sort of godmother to me. Lucy was my maid of honor, already carrying her 6-month-old son in her arms. Mr. Alberto, with his white mustache impeccably trimmed for the occasion, led me down the small improvised aisle between the chairs. I didn't invite anyone from Riverdale Springs. That part of my life seemed to belong to someone else, to a Helen who had been left behind, along with that dusty town. The first years of our marriage were of tranquil adaptation. We moved to a larger apartment near the university, with a room exclusively dedicated to my atelier. John continued teaching Brazilian literature, and I divided my time between Mr. Alberto's store and my paintings, which were now regularly exhibited in small galleries around the city. In 1971, at 25, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought immense joy, but also a deep fear I didn't expect. What if I didn't know how to be a mother? What if I repeated Cecilia's mistakes? What if my son or daughter one day betrayed me as I had been betrayed? "You're not your mother," John told me one night as I contemplated these questions aloud. "Our choices define us, not our blood." Clara was born on a rainy dawn in January 1972, a girl with intense eyes who from the first moment seemed to observe the world with insatiable curiosity. 3 years later, in 1975, our second child was born, Daniel, as calm and contemplative as his sister was energetic and questioning. Motherhood transformed my art. The women in my canvases no longer fought alone against adverse tides. Now they appeared accompanied, protecting, teaching, raising smaller figures. The colors became warmer, more vibrant, and critics noticed what they called a new phase of reconciliation in my work. The 70s brought growing recognition for my works. In 1976, I was invited for my first individual exhibition in a renowned gallery. We sold most of the canvases on opening night. Mr. Alberto, already with health debilitated by age, attended supported by a cane, his eyes wet with pride at the success of the girl who had come to his store just to clean the floor. "I always knew," he whispered, squeezing my hand with his knotty fingers. "From the first day, I saw something special in your eyes. Not just pain, but strength." Mr. Alberto passed away 3 months later. In his will, he left me a small part of the store, which was now managed by his son. It was with this money that I was able to open my own space, not just an atelier, but a small art school, where I began to teach other women, many of them with stories of pain and new beginnings similar to mine. Life was following its course, tranquil and blessed, when in 1982, almost 20 years after leaving my hometown, I received a letter that reopened wounds I believed had healed. It was from Teresa, my childhood friend from Riverdale Springs, with whom I had maintained sporadic contact over the years. The letter was brief and direct. My mother, Cecilia, was seriously ill. An aggressive cancer had spread rapidly, and doctors gave her only a few months to live. She had asked about me. "Anthony abandoned her many years ago," Teresa wrote. "He took their son, Marcus, and disappeared. They say he's somewhere in Oregon with another family. Your mother lives alone, Helen. She asks about you frequently." I kept the letter in a drawer and didn't comment on it with anyone, not even John. For weeks, I pretended that piece of paper didn't exist, that it didn't affect me. I continued giving classes, painting, taking care of my children. Clara now 10 years old, Daniel 7, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. At night, when everyone was asleep, I found myself looking at old photographs I had kept hidden for years. Me as a child in my mother's arms before bitterness consumed her. My father between the two of us on a Sunday in the square. My mother teaching me to sew. A gentle smile on the face I had almost forgotten. "Is something wrong?" John asked one night, finding me sitting on the porch well after midnight, looking at the stars with a cold cup of tea in my hands. I told him about the letter, about my sick mother, about the whirlwind of contradictory emotions consuming me. Anger, hurt, resentment, but also, surprisingly, a pang of compassion I didn't want to admit. "What do you want to do?" he asked simply. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Part of me wants to ignore all this, let her face the consequences of her choices alone. Another part wants to go there, John completed, holding my hand. Not for her, but for you, to close this chapter once and for all. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus heading to Riverdale Springs, alone with my thoughts and fears. John had offered to accompany me, but I felt this was a journey I needed to make on my own. The town had changed little in 20 years. The same dirt roads, now with some new houses, the same church in the center of the square, the same slow rhythm of life that had once suffocated me. I stayed at the only inn in town, avoiding the curious gazes of the older residents who might still remember the scandal from so many years ago. Teresa came to pick me up the next morning, aged, with graying hair and some wrinkles around her eyes, but with the same affectionate smile of our youth. "She's very weak," she warned as we walked to the house that was once mine. "She hardly leaves the bed. A neighbor goes there every day to help her with medicine and food." The house looked very different from how I remembered it, smaller, worn, with an air of abandonment that tightened my heart in an unexpected way. The garden my mother was so proud of was overgrown with weeds. The porch where my father used to sit to smoke his pipe had loose boards and damp spots. I entered alone the room where my mother rested. The smell of medicine and illness hit me like a wave. In the narrow bed, almost swallowed by the white sheets, lay a woman so fragile and diminutive, I barely recognized her. That couldn't be Cecilia, the strong and determined woman who once gave me birth, who later became my greatest antagonist. Her eyes opened slowly when I approached the bed. For a moment, they seemed unfocused, lost. Then, they recognized me, and something that looked like relief passed across her emaciated face. "Helen," she whispered, her voice just a breath. "You came." I sat in the chair beside the bed, keeping a safe physical and emotional distance. I didn't know what to say, what to do. Part of me wanted to scream, to ask how she could betray me so cruelly. Another part wanted to simply get up and leave, to abandon her with the same abandonment I had felt. "The doctors say I don't have much time," she continued, each word clearly an effort. "I needed to see you one last time. I needed to say—" Her voice failed, and she closed her eyes for a moment so long I thought she had fallen asleep. But then she reopened them, and I saw something I had never seen before in those eyes. Shame. "There's no excuse for what I did to you," she finally said. "I've spent every day of the last 20 years knowing this. Every day regretting it, every day paying the price." She then told me, in sentences broken by weakness, how her life had crumbled after my departure. Anthony had stayed with her for only 3 years. As soon as he got his hands on the money my father had left, he began seeing other women, drinking, leaving her alone for days. When Marcus was 5, Anthony simply disappeared, taking the child and what little money was left. "He did to me what we did to you," she said, a solitary tear rolling down her wrinkled face. "Perhaps it's justice. Perhaps I deserved it." I listened in silence, feeling a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. There was no satisfaction in seeing her like this, destroyed, abandoned on the brink of death. There was no triumph that I once imagined I would feel. "Why, Mom?" I finally asked the question that had haunted me for 2 decades. "Why your own daughter?" She closed her eyes again, as if the answer were too painful to be said looking at me. "Envy, bitterness. After your father died, I felt invisible, discarded. You were young, beautiful, full of life, everything I had lost. And then came Anthony making me feel desired again. It was like a drug. I knew it was wrong, that it was monstrous, but I couldn't stop." A heavy silence fell between us. "What do you say to a dying mother who admits to having destroyed your life out of envy? What kind of forgiveness can you offer for such a deep betrayal?" "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued, as if reading my thoughts. "I just wanted you to know that there hasn't been a day when I didn't regret it. There hasn't been a day when I didn't miss you." I left that room without answering, without offering the forgiveness she sought, or the absolution she perhaps expected. I returned to the inn, walking slowly through the streets I once knew so well, feeling the weight of decades of resentment on my shoulders. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of my room at the inn, looking at the full moon illuminating the rooftops of Riverdale Springs, and thought about everything that had happened since that October night in 1964, when I left this same town with just a suitcase and a shattered heart. I thought about the 18-year-old girl I was, the unbearable pain I felt, the betrayal that seemed to have destroyed my ability to trust. And then I thought about the woman I had become, artist, teacher, wife, mother. A woman who had rebuilt her life, who had found beauty and meaning where, before, there were only ashes. I realized, looking at that starry sky, that carrying the weight of resentment for another 20 years would bring me nothing but more bitterness. The forgiveness my mother sought wasn't for her benefit. It was for mine. It was the last piece of the puzzle of my healing. The next morning, I returned to my mother's house. I carried with me a small package wrapped in brown paper. Teresa received me with concerned eyes. She had a difficult night, she warned. She's weaker today. I entered again that room of illness and painful memories. My mother seemed even smaller than the day before, as if she were literally disappearing before my eyes. Her eyes opened when I approached, evident surprise in her tired gaze. "I brought something for you," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed and unwrapping the package. It was a small painting I had finished in the early hours, sitting at the inn's table with the portable paints I always carried on trips. It showed two women, one older, one younger, holding hands in front of a vibrant sunset. They weren't exactly us, but they could have been in a different world, in a life where envy and betrayal hadn't come between us. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the canvas with trembling fingers. "You became an artist?" "Yes," I replied simply. "Pain taught me to paint. Painting taught me to live again." We remained silent for a moment, the years and hurts hovering between us like an almost tangible veil. "I can't say I completely forgive you," I finally said, finding the words I couldn't the day before. "But I'm trying, for me, not for you, because this resentment only imprisons me in a past I can't change." Silent tears streamed down my mother's wrinkled face. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of late understanding of what she had lost, of what she had thrown away. "Do you have children?" she asked after a long silence. "Yes, Clara is 10, Daniel is 7. They're wonderful children." "You're a good mother," she said, not as a question, but as a realization. "I try to be, every day." "That's what matters," she whispered, her eyes beginning to close, overcome by tiredness. "Trying every day." And I stayed beside her until she fell asleep. Before leaving, I placed the small painting on the table beside the bed, where she could see it upon waking. It was the most forgiveness I could offer. Not an erasure of the past, but an acceptance that it no longer needed to define my future. Cecilia passed away 3 weeks later. I couldn't return for the funeral, but I sent flowers and a letter to Teresa, thanking her for being the bridge for that final meeting. Upon returning to the city, to my family, to my atelier, to the life I had built from scratch, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't the complete, romanticized forgiveness that books and movies present. It was something more complex, more realistic, an acceptance that some wounds never completely heal, but that we can choose not to let them define us. In the decades that followed, this understanding shaped not only my art, but also my life. I raised my children with love and presence. I taught hundreds of students to find in art a path to express their own pains and joys. I built with John a partnership based on mutual respect and trust. Today, at 79 years old, I look back and see that the terrible betrayal I once thought had destroyed my life was, in fact, just the beginning of a journey. A journey of self-discovery, of resistance, of transforming pain into beauty. If you're going through something difficult now, if you feel betrayed, abandoned, hopeless, I want you to know. It's not what happens to us that defines who we are, but what we choose to do with it. Pain can destroy us or transform us. The The choice, my dears, is always ours. Thank you for following my story to this point. If it touched your heart in any way, leave your like, share it with someone who needs to hear these words, and come back next week for another life story. Remember, our scars tell stories of survival, not defeat.